You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
Joined in the studio with our regular visitor Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society. Dave, it's always good to see you here, and especially on a nice weather day as well.
That was going to be my line in introduction. It's always lovely to be here. You can actually see the estuary, and it's quite windy. It's got a bit breezy outside right at the moment, actually, so hopefully the weather doesn't deteriorate from here, but it's great to be back. Thank you for inviting us again.
One of the things we always like to do before we move on to gardening and allotments is just a little bit of an introduction into the Sheppey Horticultural Society, Dave.
Yes, sure. The Society's long established, as people would by now have realised, long established on the island. It's been running for over 50 years. We manage two sites on Sheppey. One of the sites is situated at Medway Road, and the other is split between Richmond Street and Nursery Close. And that's the site that runs alongside the canal, so lots of people will be able to see the allotment sites as they walk past down the canal. At Medway Road, there's about 100 plots, and at Richmond Street, there is about 90 plots available. Overall, we have about 220 members, currently 220 members. Of course, anyone doing the arithmetic will see that not all of our members are actually tend an allotment. There are a number of gardeners who've got full membership of the Society, and they're able to take advantage of the two shops that we have on the sites, as well as showing their produce in the annual show in August and September. So, two sites we've been currently well established on the island. Richmond Street, we're currently oversubscribed, so there is something of a waiting list, which is, in one sense, is a double-edged sword, because it's a nice thing to say we are oversubscribed, but you can't accommodate all of the people all the time, so there has to be a waiting list, unfortunately. At Medway Road, there are still some plots available, and we offer members use of heavy tools, machinery, help cultivate a plot. And as I said just now, there are shops on both our sites which are open to members, fortuitous and advantageous rates. So a happy bunch of allotmenteering people on the island.
And Dave, I was wondering, are there any plants that you can be planting at this time of year?
Surprisingly, yes, I think there are. If anybody goes to a garden centre or a nursery at this particular time of year, they'll see any amount of bedding plants which are available for sale. Things like fuchsias, some daisies, pansies, all of those kinds of things which will go into hanging baskets, as well as providing you with a lot of colour. Lilies are currently out in force, let's say. They seem to be just about every colour you can actually think of. So if people are thinking of instant gardens, then I would recommend lilies, bedding lilies, even the statuesque type of lily, which will give you some kind of real growth, real instant gardening. On the veg side, I would tend to think more along the lines of succession sowing, lettuces, beans, even broad beans. Funnily enough, I've actually put some very late broad beans in, and they seem to be coming. What with the onset of the better weather, they seem to be responding to the better weather. But certainly things like French beans and runner beans, yes, fine. Carrots, for instance, you can still be putting those in, but certainly a lot of salad crop for succession sowing. So those kinds of things are out there, and they're pretty much plentiful at this particular moment, yeah.
And one of the things I always like to ask you when you come along is if you're planning to go out in the garden or the allotment over the next week or weekend to come, then what sort of things can you be getting on with, Dave?
I think personally you should be enjoying the fruits of your labour. We've had a rough time of it weather-wise recently. Now that the weather seems to have broken and we've finally reached summer, I think you should be enjoying, as I say, the fruits of your labour and relaxing. Having said that, there's a lot that still can be done in the garden and has to be done, certainly on the allotment, for instance. Weeds are growing like you would not believe. It's almost like you turn around and you pick the weeds out of one area, turn around, pick them out of another area, and they've grown back again, put it that way. They grow that fast, so you've got to keep on top of that. So rain permitting, of course, it's very much tidy-up time. Cutting back plants that lost some of that early vigour. And you probably noticed this, but does it seem to be extra plentiful this year, or does it not?
No, definitely it does, yeah. Definitely all of a sudden plants are growing, hedges, all that sort of thing. It's just really growing at the moment.
I hesitate to use a biblical phrase, but it seems to be very bountiful all of a sudden. So it's as well to keep on top of what's actually been growing very, very fast, trying to desperately to catch up, because as you probably realise, having had such bad spring weather, it's all desperately trying to catch up. We're about 2 or 3 weeks behind, so many of the experts are telling us, actually. So, again, it's trying desperately to catch up. It also means it's a harder time for a gardener, because you've got to be on your mettle, whereas you may be able to plan it over a period of weeks or perhaps a couple of months. You can't do that now. You find that, as I said, simply with the weeds, for instance, they are growing plentifully. And they seem to grow faster than the stuff you've actually deliberately put in there. But on the flower and ornamental side, greenhouses, nurseries, garden centres are brimming, as I've said earlier, with summer bedding plants, plants for window boxes, plants for hanging baskets, things like the busy lizzies, petunias, fuchsias, all of that kind of stuff, which I've mentioned earlier. That all needs to go in if you want to keep the garden actually going. In my own garden, I've got several low-growing bushes which have flourished over many years, and I'm going to come on to something here called watering, because have you noticed recently the ground has got very, very dry?
Yes, definitely, definitely it's got dry.
It's quickly starting to crack up, so watering has suddenly become a factor, strange though it may actually seem. So you've got to be careful about watering your plants. A lot of people might think, well, I'll water willy-nilly, but that really doesn't help matters, in effect. So if you're going out in the garden over the next few days or next few weeks, make sure that all the plants you've actually got have got enough water. Water at the base of the plant. It's enough, I think, to give established plants a couple of gallons of water, maybe once a week, and right to the roots rather than just spraying willy-nilly. They'll appreciate that more. So, yeah, there's an awful lot that can actually be done. Pruning, tidying up the garden, fertilising as well, actually, providing mulch and compost at this particular time of the year, and to kind of keep the water in. Plus the fact, of course, it will help those plants keep them cool at the roots as well. So lots that you still actually can be doing and should be doing in the garden or on allotment or wherever it happens to be.
And, we've just been covering in the short term what you can be getting on with, so perhaps looking a little bit further ahead over the next month or so would be good.
I think it's a question of sitting back a while and, again, enjoying the fruits of your labour, certainly throughout the summer. And if this weather continues, then fine. Sorry to keep going on about the weather, but it's just so delightful to have it for a change. But there's sometimes no point in gardening if it's all work and no play. It should be a pleasant experience, obviously, but there are still some jobs which will need your attention throughout the summer. We've mentioned pruning, for instance, and tidying up the garden. That is a continuing thing until such time as the plants actually start to recede back, in effect, waiting for winter to come along and autumn and what have you. So pruning back the more unruly plants, deadheading summer blooms for repeat showing, particularly roses and those which will come again and again and again, in fact. Watching for diseased and struggling plants and dealing with them quickly and not allowing the problem to spread. Very often, take my own garden, for instance, there are plants in there which I seem to have forgotten or which have been overgrown, in effect. And suddenly you find them. You think, well, hold on a minute, that's not in a good state, if you understand what I mean. So it's got to be worked out. But it's a case of actually looking for it. Sometimes people do forget what they've actually got in the garden, not least myself. Dealing with pests such as green and black fly, I've noticed, for instance, that the black fly are out with a vengeance. Last 2 days I hosed off black fly off the broad beans at least twice. I hose them off. Other people can use pesticides. But it's your own particular choice. Spraying where necessary. I haven't seen that many ladybirds this year, for instance.
I don't think I have you saying that.
There seems to be a dearth. I think there were a couple of news reports a week or so ago saying that the 7-spot ladybird is now a rarity, which is very unfortunate because they could have an absolute feast on my beans. If you've got plants in pots, drench the soil with a suitable pesticide to counteract things like vine weevil. I know I've spoken about this before, but vine weevils round and about at the moment. Another one, of course, on lilies, to make sure that you crush the lily beetles. Inspect, if you've got lilies, inspect the lily plants.
Yeah, I've seen them myself, so we've had to keep an eye on that.
The bright red one, but it's not just the beetle itself, the imago, but it's actually the larva, which has a disgusting habit of actually covering itself in its own detritus and to try to disguise itself as a bird dropping. So you need to be aware of that actually as well. Continuing the search for slugs and snails. I know it's not slug territory or slug climate at the moment, but they're hiding away somewhere. So I think you need to be very aware that, you know, the first drop of rain and they'll be out and back again and at your plants. So it's awareness. It's good husbandry in that sense. So keeping aware of what you're actually doing or what's actually happening in the garden.
I know you next wanted to cover some useful tips that perhaps you can be getting on with at this time of year.
I think first and foremost, I say this every time, and I'll say it ad infinitum actually, because I feel very strongly about it, is keeping your tools sharp and clean and disinfected as well. There's nothing worse than actually transporting or transferring disease from one plant to another, because you rule the day. It means that you haven't got one sick plant, you've got quite a few sick plants. So keep your tools sharp, clean, and disinfected. Plants in pots that have gone over can now be replaced. For instance, earlier in the year, let's say, I know it's going back a little bit, daffodils and tulips and all that kind of thing, all that type of plant, bedding plants, will have been replaced now with other things, and make sure you can keep a garden going in rotation by putting other things in. We were talking about lilies earlier, actually, on all the bedding plants which are coming on now. Dead hedge spent flowers, I've mentioned that before, and that in order to get a repeat showing. Throughout the summer months, feed your plants once every 2 weeks. Tomatoes, for instance, will now probably start to need a feed every week, for instance, if you're growing tomatoes. Suitable liquid granular feed. In fact, a lot of the plants will tolerate tomato feed as well, so you don't have to go and buy lots and lots and lots of different types of feed. Tomato feed would do just as well, in fact. Don't let the soil become exhausted, i.e. feed the soil as much as you can. There was a lot of theory going on earlier this year, actually, the fact that a lot of rain was around, obviously, and was leaching the nutrient out of the soil, in effect. So you need to replenish a lot of that and make sure that you're keeping up with the compost, with the fertilizers, with the replenishment, the nutrients for your plants, and they'll reward you with a longer season. Is an important one. It's holiday time, so if you're going on holiday, make arrangements with either a neighbour or one of the family members to water your plants. There's nothing worse, I assure you, than coming back and finding your plants are half dead and you've actually got to try and revive them. Sometimes it's impossible, so make arrangements. Or what I tend to do is to put them, those which are movable, is actually to put them into a much more shady position. Water them extremely well for a week or so beforehand, before going away, and then when they're in the shade, they're much more likely to actually survive better than they would do if placed in the sun. So all of those kinds of tips are around at this particular time of the year, Daniel.
And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the show, but before that, we were just going to finish off with some more useful tips.
I found one a couple of weeks ago, actually. People would think, well, what the heck is this grown man doing walking down the road with a child's windmill in his hand? But I bought a half a dozen of them. These are ones that you can get from pound shops, that kind of thing, which are about a foot in diameter. And they're brightly coloured, they shine and glitter, but they move fast, and it don't half keep the blackbirds off things like strawberries. We were talking, you've got a good strawberry crop this year, haven't you?
Yes,
and you're desperate to try and keep them off, because blackbirds will just sit and wait when you're not around, and they will get in before you can actually get around to picking your actual crop. But I just wanted to mention, this is a cheap way of actually doing it. We find with scarecrows that scarecrow becomes very, very staid, and it stays in one position, and the birds tend to think, yes, okay, it's a scarecrow. Eventually they learn that it doesn't actually move towards them or do anything. But these little windmills I've found to be very, very effective indeed. As I say, they glitter, they're brightly coloured, they make a noise when they turn as well, which tends to keep the birds off. And I found I've got a pretty good strawberry crop this year, albeit in hanging baskets, but the birds can't get near it because they just can't get by the windmill itself. A tip that I discovered a couple of weeks ago, and I'm glad, or rather my wife is very glad that she's eating the strawberries rather than the birds, because we've got nesting birds in the garden. So they're on the lookout for lots and lots of my food, so to speak. A good tip, I think.
Yeah, it sounds it. And I know you next wanted to cover all about the show.
Yeah, it's our Golden Jubilee this year. This is our 50th show at the De Lacy Hall, Esplanade Gardens in Sheerness. It's again the same time. This year it's on Saturday the 31st of August from 3 o'clock till 6 o'clock. From 12 till 3 we have judging, and then from 3 o'clock till 6 o'clock on the Saturday it's open to the public. And on Sunday the 1st of September the show is open to from 11 o'clock until 4 p.m. when there is the usual auction of the produce, where everybody tends to turn up for it. And you've seen this, haven't you?
Yeah,
when you came to the show. There's a buzz about the show, which is there's an effervescence about the show, which is gratifying actually. And, you've seen this yourself when you've actually come. People will want to talk about it. It's a friendly bunch of people. There's a buzz about it. So yeah, it's at the De Lacy Hall, Esplanade Gardens, Sheerness. Saturday 31st of August, 3 till 6. And Sunday the 1st of September, 11 till 4 p.m.
Dave, how much does it actually cost to rent an allotment plot for the year?
There's two basic sizes that we actually offer on both the sites. One's a 10-rod, and the other is half that size, quite plainly, quite obviously. For a 10-rod allotment, it's a total cost of £41.50 per year. Those are costs that have been held over the last couple of years, and we're holding those particular costs, or these particular costs, throughout 2014 as well. So this year it would have cost allotmenteers for their plot, a 10-rod plot, £41.50. That's made up of ground rent of £25, a water rate of £15. Water, as we all know these days, is expensive stuff, which is why we ask people to be very punctilious about how they actually do water their plots rather than willy-nilly, something we've mentioned throughout the evening. Water rate is £15, and then the subscription to the society is just £1.50. For 5-rod allotment, the ground rent is £12.50, as you would expect, half the size. Water rate £7.50, and the subscription to the society is again £1.50. That doesn't actually change. You can't actually ask 75p for a 5-rod plot for subscription. So yes, it's £41.50 and £21.50 for the year, and those prices will be held for 2014 as well. We've decided to keep those actually subscription rates. The £1.50 for the society's subscription. In effect, as you probably would have guessed, there are allotmenteers and then there are other members who don't actually run or don't actually tend an allotment. That £1.50 allows them to, or allows members to actually use the shops. It also allows the members to put their produce into the annual show. For instance, this year, something specifically designed for the Golden Jubilee show is we've introduced a new class of hanging baskets, which is something that household gardeners or house gardeners perhaps would perhaps do rather than allotmenteers, but it's just something that we can actually add to it. Now, it seems very small, but I think it's quite important that we tend to keep looking at all of those classes that we actually put into the show. Here's an additional one for the Golden Jubilee, which will hopefully entice the gardening members into exhibiting at the show. So £41.50 for a 10-rod and £21.50 for a 5-rod plot. Good value, we think.
Dave, what would you recommend to someone who is interested in becoming a member of the society and perhaps going on to rent their own allotment plot as well?
I think the first thing to say, or the first thing to do, is to come and have a chat and look around either one of our actual sites. Weekends and in particular Sunday mornings, they're ideal for meeting a cross-section of the membership. Meet a group of dedicated and boy, you need to be dedicated sometimes to have an allotment, certainly with this particular weather we're having, or we've had this year. Dedicated, friendly people, and I do really sincerely mean that there are friendly people. You've met some of them, so you know what they're actually like. They'll guide you through any questions that you may very well have. They'll show you sites as well. Some of our people who run the shops will invite you to walk around the sites to have a look. There's nothing better than actually looking at first hand rather than just putting your name down on a list, certainly at Richmond Street. But after you've put your name down, come and have a look. Or please feel free to go and have a look and see the kind of thing which is actually grown on the sites. I think also get the family interested. It'd be as well, actually, to bring the family with you. We do like to see kids. They're the future. And I know I've said this before, and I'll say it again, but they really are the future. The future for, the whole movement of allotmenteering. And you can talk over your commitment, obviously, beforehand. There is, after all, some work involved. It's not all strictly pleasure. But it's important that you go at your own pace. There's no racing involved in allotmenteering. Some things will catch up with you, and you take it at your own pace, in effect. We recommend that people take it at their own pace. Look at society websites. Because of the growing popularity of having an allotment and growing your own food, there's many TV programmes. You probably have noticed The Gardener's World on a Friday evening. Famous gardeners, in fact, are not just sticking to flowers and ornamentals, but they're also in the vegetable gardens, very much so in the vegetable gardens. The Chelsea Flower Show majored on vegetables. They're becoming just as important, especially with the price of food these days, obviously. Likewise, there are many books now available. In fact, there are whole shelves of books dedicated to allotmenteering and to gardening. I think if you know one, and you'll meet allotmenteers if you come to either of our sites on the Sunday morning, pick an established allotmenteer's brain for information. We all do it differently, and we're all picking each other's brains, and there is no absolute expert in this, actually. There's always something new to be learned. I may come up, as a relative newcomer to somebody, come up with an idea which an established allotmentier thinks is a good idea, and he'll adopt it. Why not? It's all free. It's all communal ideas. But last but not least, if you're finding it difficult to squeeze all that you'd like to grow in your garden or your window box, and you can't find enough space for those veggies, you really would like to come to us, as we have the space available. And it's a little bit bigger than a window box. But if people are interested in taking up an allotment, then I would suggest speaking to our very honourable Honorary Secretary, Sue Underhill, Mrs. Sue Underhill. And Sue is available on 01795 661 547. And before I go any further, we've been discussing this earlier, but we now have a website, which is www.sheppeyhorticulturalsociety.co.uk, or we have an email address as well, and that's Sheppey Horticultural Society. I'm going to have to read this one. I do apologise, Daniel. But it's Sheppey Horticultural Society at gmail.com. So there are the two website addresses. It's a relatively new website. Don't expect for there to be pages and pages and pages and pages of stuff on there. We're busy putting stuff on. So if anybody wants to contact us, either through Sue Underhill on 01795 661 547 or through the Gmail email address, fine, you're very welcome. We're delighted to hear from you.
Dave, as always, it's great to have you along here at the Monday Night Community Show.
I hope it's useful. I enjoy coming along. The Horticultural Society is very grateful for you taking time out to speak about us, and long may it continue. I hope it continues anyway, but we look forward to seeing you at the show.
Yep, and I think I'm going to be popping down to the allotments.
Oh, for the outside broadcast, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So I always look forward to that each year, so I'll just see you then, I think, next.
It's great, because we have sat down on occasions, haven't we, and we're sitting on allotment, and suddenly we realise we are in the middle of Sheerness, but it's very quiet and very peaceful, and if the sun is shining, great. Look forward to it.
It always is good.
Cheers.
Dave, as always, thank you very much.
Pleasure.